The information presented here relies partly on theoretical principles and reasoned assumptions. The aim is to offer several possible, though not necessarily exclusive, explanations for the profound mysteries to be unveiled. In the distant year 986, a Viking ship bravely broke through the icy shackles of the Arctic, which until then had securely protected the shores of an unknown land. The cold yet vibrant waters beckoned, and the wild nature promised new horizons. It was there, at the very edge of the then-known world, that a Viking colony was founded, named Greenland by its pioneers. However, 3.5 centuries later, when a European ship again reached this remote settlement, the sailors found it empty, abandoned, and desolate. What caused the disappearance of these brave Viking settlers? This story, like a bronze warrior, marks the beginning of ancient sagas. 1,000 years ago, from a quiet Icelandic harbor, Eric the Red led his fleet of Viking ships west into the vast, unknown sea. But this great story concludes with a profound mystery. The waves of time have relentlessly washed away faint traces of human presence, leaving behind only scattered patterns that seem to lead nowhere. Nearly a millennium has erased the details of one particular man's adventures from memory, yet his spirit still hovers over these lands. Eric the Red was a true Viking of the old mold, harsh, wild, and unyieldingly independent. 10 centuries ago, in Norway, Eric became entangled in a bloody skirmish that resulted in the deaths of several of the king's men. He was forced to flee, finding refuge in Iceland. There, he discovered that these lands were already settled. Their inhabitants, then as now, were sheep farmers and fishermen. They had recently embraced Christianity and, with the fervor of new converts, were erecting churches on the sacred sites of their pagan ancestors. The cults of the Old Norse faith had been brutally suppressed, but Eric the Red, despite everything, continued to worship the ancient Norse gods, maintaining loyalty to his ancestral traditions. In July 1978, a small group gathered at a secluded farm in rural western Iceland to witness secret rites, forbidden since the time of Eric the Red. Someone had dared to revive the ancient pagan faith. Adherents, addressing their high priest, uttered words filled with profound meaning. "We are all devoted to our religion." Our Vikings, the ancient Vikings, before setting sail, appealed to the spirits and bravely went into battle. And then we celebrate and drink to your health. This is happening for the first time. His hammer, a mighty symbol, embodied the Old Norse faith, representing the thunderer, a mystical sign revered in northern Europe since prehistoric times. The priest then led his followers to a mountain sanctuary, far from the noisy roads and cities of modern Iceland. Vikings worshipped the primal forces of nature. Their chief deity was the sky god, lord of storms, the formidable ruler of thunder. His power is captivating, isn't it so? After 10 centuries of suppression, a horn filled with mead was once again raised to mighty Thor. On the plain near the Thingvellir waterfall, the past is celebrated as if coming alive. Modern Icelandic farmers gather here, just as their ancestors did in the summer of 982. Today, strength is assessed here, while 1,000 years ago, people were judged. Free Norsemen gathered here to engage in politics and resolve disputes. Times were changing, life was becoming more ordered, more civilized. But that same spring, Eric the Red once again became entangled in a bloody feud, and he was outlawed. Eric was forced to flee. He steered his ship west, into the unexplored expanses of the ocean. From the northern mists, like a phantom, emerged a massive island, bound by ice and seemingly completely uninhabitable, except for a narrow strip of land on its southwest coast. It was here that Eric's people settled, optimistically naming their new home Greenland, the Greenland. They established themselves, building homes and barns, fencing pastures and fields, attempting to forge a new life in this harsh land. But even in Greenland, Eric the Red could not find complete refuge from his inner conflicts and external circumstances. Eric's wife, genuinely devoted to the new faith, built the first church in Greenland. She forbade Eric from entering their shared home until he agreed to abandon pagan customs. However, historical evidence suggests that the old Vikings' conversion to Christianity was not complete, and the spirit of the ancient gods continued to live in his heart. The fjords of Greenland, despite all their beauty, could not sustain the growing colony. Crops did not thrive, and the land's wealth could only be obtained from its wild, untamed nature. Small groups of Norse hunters ventured into these vast, unexplored expanses. The Arctic seas soon sank their cumbersome longships, but they continued their journey in small open boats, undertaking voyages that must have lasted for years, defying the elements. European ships could very rarely reach distant Greenland. Long years passed between visits. But several Arctic treasures, incredibly valuable in Europe, lured traders to venture west. One such treasure was the gerfalcon. Sultans and caliphs offered chests full of gold for a live Greenlandic falcon. Arab court officials told them that this fierce and most valuable hunting bird came from the edge of the world, from the legendary Ultima Thule, a land located north of all known bounds. Norse hunters pushed even further, beyond the edge of the known world, harvesting narwhals, the large, tusked whales of the high Arctic. In distant Europe, medieval alchemists sold the whale's tusk as a unicorn horn, grinding it into magical potions promising countless wonders. One such narwhal could make a hunter rich for life if he managed to survive the vast, unknown wilderness and successfully return to Greenland. However, as time passed, fewer and fewer ships arrived from Europe. The Norse Greenlanders plunged into ever deeper isolation, gradually disappearing from history, save for one brief, alarming mention in church records from 1300, noting that a Greenlander had been burned at the stake for secretly practicing the old faith. After this, only an ominous silence ensued, engulfing the fate of this remote colony. In the summer of 1342, a ship entered the western settlement of Greenland, carrying a bishop dispatched from Europe. His mission was to ascertain the reasons for the Norse Greenlanders' delay in paying church tithes. However, upon arrival, the envoy found the Norse farms completely empty and abandoned. No news, not the slightest sign of life. The settlers had simply vanished. For the next 6 centuries, the fate of the Norse Greenlanders remained one of the most intriguing and unsolved mysteries in the annals of history. In 1921, archaeological expeditions conducted extensive excavations near Cape Farewell, located at the southern tip of Greenland. During the work, a church cemetery was discovered, where numerous human remains with pronounced physical anomalies lay: hunchbacks, dwarfs, and infertile cripples. The question arose, was this discovery the key to solving the mystery? Did it mean that the Norse colony declined and died out due to inbreeding and chronic malnutrition, exacerbated by severe cultural isolation? At the very edge of this cemetery, oriented west towards the American continent, stood a coffin nearly 7 feet long, but it was completely empty. Was this evidence of the complete demise of Eric the Red's people? Or did only the weakest and most infirm remain on this land? The search for traces of the vanished Greenlandic Vikings leads researchers to the harsh northern shores of Canada. Here, even in the summer months, Arctic waters rage with relentless power. Travelers anxiously scan the boundless expanse, desperately seeking signs of safe refuge. Payne Bay, washed by powerful tidal currents, is cold and remote, yet despite this, it teems with life. These lands represent the richest caribou grounds in the eastern Canadian Arctic, also abundant with trout, Arctic char, seals, and whales. High above Payne Bay, visible for miles from the sea, stand 3 monumental structures resembling lighthouses. Their age is presumed to predate Columbus's first voyage to North America by centuries. Each of these structures is topped with a 500-pound stone resting on 15-foot rows of carefully laid stones. However, it should be noted that the primitive Eskimos who inhabited these parts at the time these stone beacons were built were only about 4 feet tall and lived in earth pits covered with whale ribs and animal skins. Professor Thomas Lee of Laval University in Quebec dedicated 12 years of his life to searching for the builders of these mysterious ruins in Payne Bay. As a result of his research, Lee developed a unique theory, which, however, has not gained universal acceptance among some experts. The modern Canadian Eskimo community of Payne Bay proved to be the richest source of information, allowing Professor Lee to formulate his original hypothesis. The introduction of modern technologies, unfortunately, significantly impacted the ancient way of life of the Inuit community. While younger generations once learned Eskimo customs directly from their fathers, government schools now provide education, and ancient customs are gradually becoming only vague, dim memories. Among these fading memories, legends of dwarfs and giants, known as the Tunnet, who supposedly once roamed these lands, are vaguely preserved. These legends are deeply rooted in the Inuit past. Among the bearers of this ancient knowledge was the late grandmother Nana, whose granddaughter also preserves some of these stories. Grandmother Nana was born 79 years ago in an igloo located in an Inuit winter hunting camp. Professor Lee meticulously records these tribal memories, which, in his opinion, go back nearly 800 years. Grandmother Nana recounted that her parents, and through them herself, received this story from the Inuit living in Sekluk, which explains its origin. When asked if these mysterious people could lift huge stones, she replied that, according to their traditions, they were unusually strong. She also described these people indicating that there were two types. Some were immensely strong, almost giant-sized, while others were short. They had light skin and possibly thick eyebrows, and they were noticeably different from the Inuit. Professor Lee recalled his first visit to Tomahawk Island in 1966, accompanied by two Eskimos, or Inuit, one of whom was an elder named Zachary Az. In this seldom-visited region of the Canadian Arctic, Professor Lee made a number of impressive discoveries. He is convinced that he succeeded in identifying the legendary tunnet. Nantucket Island is located near the mouth of the Payne River. Professor Lee described his first impression of it. It appeared to him as part of a wild and beautiful landscape, a kind of natural amphitheater that impressed him with its immense size and unique location. Zachary Az guided the researcher across the island, and then, leaving him, pointed the way forward and said that it had been built before, conveying the incredible antiquity of the structures. The central structures in these ancient communities were the so-called longhouses, expansive communal sleeping quarters. The longhouses discovered on Pamioke Island served as the basis for Dr. Lee's theory. One such enormous longhouse had internal dimensions of 83 feet long and 20 feet wide. Its shape resembled the outline of a ship, with walls curving slightly outward, and the northern part served as sleeping quarters. The stones used in the walls were extremely heavy. One particular stone weighed over 1,000 pounds. Inside was a great hall with 11 central fireplaces. Since there were also 11 food storage pits outside the building, the researcher hypothesized that 11 families lived here. Assuming each family consisted of 5 people, then approximately 50 to 55 individuals inhabited this longhouse. This, undoubtedly, indicates a level of social organization significantly surpassing the capabilities of the Eskimo people. According to Professor Lee, the people who inhabited this house were Norsemen. He believes they were hunters from Greenland, arriving here alone, only men, and likely intermarrying with local women, producing mixed-race children. This territory was and remains an extremely rich hunting ground. Professor Lee believes that a small group of Viking hunters separated from the declining Greenlandic colony and settled here in North America, ultimately giving rise to a mixed-blood tribe. Professor Lee's theories have faced fierce criticism. His opponents argue that the longhouse was built by Eskimos. However, the nearest forest that could provide beams for its caribou skin roof is 150 miles to the south. These beams could only have been transported by ships, which Eskimos never possessed. Furthermore, Eskimos were perfectly adapted to the harsh conditions of this environment and would never have built such a drafty and cold structure. Professor Lee, conversely, believes this structure served as a kind of primitive palace. The aforementioned longhouse was an integral part of an extensive settlement complex that stretched along the coastal strip, reaching an area known as Diana, located approximately 70 miles to the north. Notably, similar longhouses are found at regular intervals throughout the significant distance. The researcher interpreted this structure as a prototype of an Arctic kingdom, where Norsemen were the rulers and Stone Age Eskimo tribes were their subjects. In his opinion, this was a unique symbiotic formation in the harsh conditions of the north. Around the central longhouse, remnants of primitive dwellings once belonging to Eskimos are still visible, indicating their close proximity. Cultural exchange was evident. Eskimos undoubtedly adopted many aspects of material culture and technology from Iron Age Europeans, which contributed to their development. During painstaking archaeological excavations, the professor discovered a heavily worn but unmistakably recognizable blade of a Norse battle axe, which became significant evidence of Scandinavian presence. Hypothetically, if one were to leave this small bay and head directly east, with a favorable wind, it would be possible to reach Eric's homestead on the southwest coast of Greenland within a week. This idea underscores the relative proximity and potential connections between the regions. A natural question arises. Did the surviving members of Eric the Red's people find their final resting place here, in this harsh Arctic stronghold that witnessed their last days? Just 50 yards from the massive longhouse on an elevated ridge are remarkable stone tombs, which became the culmination of Professor Lee's sensational archaeological discoveries. Inside these burials, to his amazement, he discovered remains which, in his deep conviction, belonged to both a primitive Eskimo, presumably of mixed heritage, and a medieval white man. Notably, this skull was the first and, so far, the only pre-Columbian European artifact ever discovered in the Western Hemisphere, giving the find exceptional historical value. Such revolutionary discoveries, naturally, sparked fierce scientific debates in the academic community. After all, rewriting established history textbooks is a very difficult task, requiring undeniable proof. Traditional hypotheses long postulated that ancient cultures developed and disappeared in strict isolation from each other. However, recent research and hypotheses increasingly convincingly indicate that the evolutionary stages of human development might have been much more closely interconnected than previously thought. Paradoxically, the demise of the Norse settlers in Greenland may have contributed to the formation of a new type of Eskimo, taller, more resilient, and more skilled, whose direct descendants are to this day the rightful masters of these harsh northern lands. Nowadays, a day's journey upstream from the mouth of the Payne River, modern Inuits still set up their traditional hunting camps, preserving ancient customs. One expedition member, observing the area, noted, "Yes, we saw many traces, but this was the only one we managed to find." Despite the change of millennia, the Arctic way of life remains remarkably unchanged at its core. Like their ancestors, hunters continue their arduous journey upriver in search of migrating caribou herds, ensuring the survival of their communities. The researcher expressed his conviction that current investigations have only peeled back a layer of mystery regarding numerous questions concerning the history of the North, and that, in his opinion, humanity has barely scratched the surface of knowledge in this area. He emphasized that the work with archaeological evidence from Payne Bay is by no means complete. At least one more full-scale expedition is needed both into the bay itself and along the entire Ungava coast. Numerous reports suggest the existence of other longhouses that remain inaccessible for detailed study. Therefore, a significant amount of valuable evidence likely still awaits discovery. Moreover, he suggested that with more thorough searches in the deeper inland areas, even more significant artifacts might be found. At an elevated position, towering above the temporary camp, stands a mysterious beacon, gazing deep into the boundless expanses of the North American wilderness. It would be erroneous to attribute the creation of this structure to the Inuit or Eskimos. However, upon close inspection, its shape strikingly resembles Thor's hammer, adding yet another enigma to this location.